Hi, this is Doug from Dynamic Computing, and welcome to episode 46 of 10-Minute Amiga Retrocast, the 520 Classic Accelerator review. Now, we've always wanted more speed for our Amigas. Even back in the 80s with our Amiga 1000s, 500s, and 2000s, we had lots of accelerator solutions back then that were really expensive. But while we did have accelerators back in the day, as collectors, we also want a little boost in speed today, and luckily we can get them at pretty reasonable prices. With a majority of the retro Amiga users now using their computers for games with WHD load, this is even more important. You need lots of RAM, you need a fast hard drive in order to really run and take advantage of WHD load, which is a great solution, by the way. A faster CPU doesn't hurt either. While there have been some really great products out there for years now, there's a new one that's fairly recent on the market from IRIX Labs that I want to talk to you about today, the 520 Classic Accelerator for the Amiga 500 and Amiga 1000. Now, IRIX Labs has created some really great products over the years, including the HC508 Accelerator, which had a nice 68,000 chip running at 50 megahertz and a CF card, and I believe it had an IDE channel on it. And it's a great product, and I think it's still available. It's a good product. But with the new 520 Classic, they've upgraded things a bit by bumping the processor to a 68020 running at 28 megahertz and added some more features that we're going to cover on this episode. The new 520 Classic just fills in a few gaps and takes care of a few weaknesses that the HC508 had. Let's take a closer look at the product itself. Here's our little beauty right here. Now, first off, we have a 68020 over here, clocked at 28 megahertz. Now, full disclosure, these are probably refurbished ones, probably pulled off of other equipment. This is twice as fast as the Amiga 1200 68020, and these are 32-bit units as opposed to the 68000 being a hybrid 16-bit and 32-bit unit. Next, we have 8 megabytes of RAM on this little guy. It's important to note that this is 24-bit address-spaced RAM that normally the 68000 could address, so it will not work with other RAM expansions that use 24-bit RAM expansion, the first 8 megabytes basically. Now ideally, it would have been great to have this memory in 32-bit address space, which the 6820 in theory should be able to support, and it would allow you to use it with existing RAM expansions. Of course, it doesn't affect your chip RAM at all. You're fine with that. Now here, we have a CF card slot that is bootable, and it's important to note that this is not hot swappable right here. You're going to want to keep this plugged in while you're powered on. Now, you can take it out when you have the power off and put it in your PC and access this through WinUAE or Amiga Forever or whatever emulator you use and actually see what's on here and copy files to it. This clocks in at about 3.3 megabytes per second, which is faster than the A1200 or the A600 IDE controller. Next, we've got the SD card slot. Now this one you can hot swap right with the power on. It's designed for transferring info from your PC to your Amiga and can also be used as an extra drive as it's quite speedy in Amiga OS. I'm using a small 256 meg card in mine since I had it lying around, but you should be able to use just about anything up to 4 gigs. Now, you don't want to go beyond 4 gigs because the Win95 or the FAT95 file system that the Amiga OS uses isn't going to see it, and it's just going to be wasted space. So just get yourself a 4 gig or smaller card and you'll be just fine. Now this little guy right here, this is interesting. This is an actual full-size IDE controller that you can use for connecting an actual hard drive or a CD drive or DVD drive. Just be aware you'll have to get power from someplace else as there are no power headers on the board at all. You can pick up a power header with a Molex connector from Amazon really cheap and plug an external device like a hard drive or a DVD in there with no problem at all. Now the other cool thing is this interface runs at about 4.5 to 5 megabytes per second. So it's actually quicker than this. So if you're looking for speed, you could just connect something up to here. The Classic 512 also has 512 kilobytes of flash ROM, and I'm thinking it's probably this little guy right here. This allows you to put an actual ROM file into flash ROM and have it stored on here permanently. Now, it does not allow you to store multiple flash ROMs like something like the A500 Plus does, but it's very useful for making things auto boot. The Classic 520 uses a traditional 86-pin slot on the side interface made popular with the Amiga 500. One of the important things to note is that this is advertised right out of the box to work with an Amiga 1000. So let's take a look at how we would install it on different kinds of Amigas. Now here we have your traditional Amiga 500. This is a revision 5 board. Nice machine, beautiful, clean. And we have our traditional slot on the side slot right here. So we would just take it with our card slots facing forward and slot the little guy right in there. And she's ready to roll. Take a look at that from the front. Not very big, works perfect. Now things get a smidgen more complicated with our Amiga 1000s. Instead of the slot on the side slot being on the left side here, it's on the right side. So it's very important to understand that these go in the opposite direction. So now our CF card and our SD cards are pointing to the back. We stay upright, but it's just pointing to the back. Let's get that slotted in. Slots right in. Now, note that this has some spacers on the bottom that are designed for the Amiga 500. Okay, so this will be touching the ground on the Amiga 500. The Amiga 1000 is higher in the air, so we have this big gap here. Now, it's not a very big card, so the weight's not really weighing down on it much. But it's a good idea to get something to put underneath here to prop it up. Either 3D print an external case for it, buy an external case, or just get something to prop it up so gravity doesn't cause any issues for you. Now, how about our lovely Amiga case from Stephen Jones, the Checkmate 1500. When you put your Amiga 500 in here, like I did, and you saw in one of my previous videos, it has this ingenious device here that gives you power, adds a traditional Zorro 2 slot, and also extends out your 86-pin slot on the side slot. But this is absolutely critical, and this I cannot find documented in the manual. I went through the whole manual. Normally, slot on the side, you're going to plug something into the side over here, okay? What this does is this raises it up and turns the entire thing over. So instead of, see, hooking it up backwards like this, like we would on the Amiga 2000 or 1000, that's going to fry your card. This, the CF card and the SD card still face to the front, but the entire thing flips over. Now, so just visualize it with me here. We're plugged into the side with Stephen's new case. It goes over and it just flips it like that. This is absolutely critical because that is absolutely how I murdered my ACA 500 Plus card, by accidentally putting it upside down, powering it on, and poof, dead card. My fault 100%. But like this, she's going to work absolutely perfectly. We can boot her right up. Now, like the Amiga 1000, you notice there's no real support in here. So it wouldn't be that hard to just jury rig something like right under here. This is going to be right above the drive tray. Just a little something to prop it up. Just put a little pressure there so it doesn't sag. But it's going to work perfect. I've already tested out in the Checkmate case and it works absolutely wonderfully. Boots right to it. I have not tested it with a Zorro card yet, but I can't imagine any reason why it wouldn't work with a Zorro card too. So now that we've learned a little bit about the hardware itself, let's actually install it in a machine and see what we need to do to get it to work. Now, my board came with a little sheet of paper that talks about setting up the HC508 board. They're similar, but they're not exactly the same. There are differences. So while this was helpful to me, there were some things that just didn't cover that I'm going to cover in this video. Hopefully, about the time that this is released, IRIX Labs will get new updated information put out there and ship it with the cards. Now, when you first boot it up, there's a very quick splash screen that lasts for maybe a second that tells you to hit the left mouse button if you want to configure it. I've hit the left mouse button here, and you see I've come up to this screen that says F1 to disable or enable the CPU, F2 to enable or disable fast RAM, F3 for your Kickstart ROM enabled, or F4 for IDE enabled. So let's say we disable the 68020 and the fast RAM. Our IDE is still going to work, and our Kickstart ROM is still going to be enabled. If we disable the Kickstart ROM, it'll default back to using whatever ROM is on the board of the machine. Very useful, very simple. When you've made your changes on here, just hit F10 to save them. It seems to just save them for that one boot of the machine, so if you reboot, just go back in and change your settings again. Now this brings up an important point. This equipment, just like a lot of the new Amiga 500 accelerators, grabs the reset line so you're able to configure the device before you actually boot into the Amiga. The new Romulator that I covered in a video a few weeks ago also grabs the reset line. That makes the two not compatible. If you have something like the Romulator plugged in and an accelerator card like this, or the A500 Plus, you're going to have problems because it's not going to grab the reset line properly. Nothing's going to boot. So you need to pop out your Romulator when you use this. So now let's talk about what we need to do to get a ROM flashed onto your board. Anything 2.0 or above should work just fine with the auto booting SCSI in here. 1.3, no, you're going to have issues if you try to put a 1.3 ROM on here, I would guess, because it does not have SCSI.device built into the ROM, so there's always issues. There's workarounds, but we're not going to cover them right here. The first thing you're going to need is a copy of an Amiga OS ROM on floppy. I really strongly recommend going with Amiga OS 3.1.4, brand new, just a year old, and it allows you to use much bigger partitions. You know, it's getting harder to find a 4 gig hard drive or a 4 gig CF card. They're not as popular and common as they used to be. Do yourself a favor and just order a copy of Amiga OS 3.1.4. In the United States, get it from Amiga on the Lake. They're great guys. In Europe, you guys have a bunch of sources for it. I think AmigaStore.eu, probably Amiga Kit carries that kind of stuff. But now my Amiga 1000 here works great with the Amiga 500 ROM. You'll need some kind of boot disk to boot your system from floppy or from a Gotek drive. That works too, in order to flash the ROM. Myself, I put the flash utility and the menu and firmware updates and my Amiga OS 3.1.4 ROM on this floppy using my Amiga 1200. I downloaded the files from the IRIX Labs website, which I'll have down here. I copied them onto my CF card that I also share with my Amiga 1200. Put a floppy in the Amiga 1200, booted it up, put the CF card in the PCMCIA socket slot, copied the files right to floppy. I'm good to go. Not everybody has that capability, so you need to find a way to get these onto floppy or onto a Gotek drive, flash drive. That works equally as well, as long as you can boot the system to it. Now what we do is we locate jumper 2 on the board, and when it's in position 2 and 3, it uses the onboard flash ROM to boot. When it's in position 1 and 2, this goes into the enable mode that enables you to put a new flash file on here. Let me show you how that works. First of all, we're just going to flip over our little jumper right here. Voila. Just for laughs, I'm going to take out my SD card and CF card. I don't need them in there at this point in time. We're going to put this back in the machine. Now, this being an Amiga 1000, I'm going to have to boot first to a Kickstart disk. And I've got my trusty handy dandy Kickstart 1.3 right here. So let's get that going. Okay, Kickstart's loaded. You can see it right there. Now let's go ahead and boot to Workbench 1.3. Now here, this is kind of cool. You can see where, even though I have the ROM disabled on here, it still sees all of the memory. So we've got almost 9 megabytes of memory. It's a little over 8.5 megabytes of memory free on here. I'm going to take my floppy disk that has my 3.1.4 ROM on here and all of my utilities that I previously downloaded from IRIX Labs. Put her in DF1. Let's get a shell open here. Now, let's go CD DF1. And take a look at what we have here. Now, if you'll notice, we've got the C520 flash, we've got C520 boot 1.1.ROM. That is the firmware update that we downloaded from the IRIX Labs website. And we've got our Kickstart image. You see kick.A500, A600, A2000, etc. right on there. Let's first flash the new firmware onto the device. What we do is we use this program, C520 flash space, and now we're going to use -B for the boot firmware, and then the name of the file, which is C520 boot 1.1.ROM. It's going to go through and it's going to tell us if that succeeds or not. Found ROM image, sure. Reading file. Your system should be booted with disabled map ROM jumper. Yes, we've done that. We're going to hit enter to continue. Now it's erasing the boot ROM and it's reflashing it. Verifying. Yep. Operation complete. Fantastic. So now we've updated the firmware to version 1.1 on our device. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. Now let's put the ROM on here. Now let's flash the Kickstart ROM onto the 520 Classic Accelerator. If you're using Amiga OS 3.1.4, you're going to find two versions of the Kickstart ROM on your modules disk. One of them says for burning, the other one is in a folder that says something about unswapped. You want the one in the folder that says unswapped. It's got the shorter file name. Now we're going to use our command C520 flash -K for Kickstart, and then the name of the Kickstart ROM. A500.46.143. It's going to take about 45 seconds to load this into memory. Now, if you flash the wrong ROM file on there, all is not lost. You'll just boot up and you'll get like a purple screen or something. If you flash the wrong one, just flip the jumper back over, reboot, get the right ROM file this time on your floppy, and reflash the flash on there, and you should be just fine. Now your system should be booted with a disabled map ROM jumper. It is. Press enter to continue. It's going to erase the existing ROM that's on there, and it's going to reflash it with the correct one and verify it, which is always good. Done. Now we'll pop our Workbench disk out of here. We're going to power down. Now we flip the jumper back, JP2, back to its regular position. Okay, we're going to boot up, and in theory, we'll see our kickstart image here just the way we want to. Look at that, perfect. It's now, this Amiga 1000 is now auto booting kickstart. It doesn't need a floppy to boot kickstart anymore. Sounds good to me. So there are a few ways we can now get Amiga OS onto our new system. What we want to do is boot from floppy, so we're going to use our original Amiga OS 3.1.4 floppies. Boot this little guy up. Now, as far as the size of the CF card that you use, if you're using Amiga OS 3.1 or below, just do yourself a favor and stick to like a 4 gig or an 8 gig or a 16 gig card. You're really limited to a partition size of only 4 gigs on all your partitions. And yes, there are ways you can jump through flaming hoops to get larger partitions under Amiga OS 3.1, but don't do it. Just, if you want large partitions, get Amiga OS 3.1.4. It natively supports it. You don't even have to fight with it. It's wonderful. If you want to stick to Amiga OS 3.1, just use a smaller CF card. You know, you use a 64 gig card and you're chopping that thing up into 16 4 gig partitions. Just a waste of RAM and everything. We've just booted to our Amiga OS 3.1.4 install disk. So let's go ahead and take care of the hard drive on here. This is a 16 gig card that I've put in here. You're going to launch HD Toolbox. Now this is not going to be a lesson on installing Amiga OS 3.1.4, but I do want to give you some pointers here. First thing you're going to do, change drive type and tell it define new and have it read the configuration from the drive. It's going to read your particular CF card and get as much information as it can, give it a name. Boom, we're done. There it is. Click OK. We're going to, you see where it says status, save changes. We want to save the changes to the drive. Doesn't require a reboot yet. Next, we're going to partition the drive. As a rule of thumb, even with Amiga OS 3.1.4, stick with a boot partition under 4 gigs. That way, if you want to use an old software tool to do something with your and look at your drive, or if you have old software that really won't see large partitions, and I have some of that software, just do yourself a favor and keep the work partition smaller and then make a big data or work partition. We're going to create, we'll call it a 4 gig partition here. Direct SCSI transfer. SDH0 is a fine name. And we are going to click on change here. And we're going to change our block size to 1024. Rule of thumb, if you use a small partition like 1 gig, 512 is fine. Okay, use bigger ones like 2 gig, 4 gig, something like that. Use about 1024 blocks. Anything at like 8 or 16 or 32 gigs, use 4096K blocks. If you go bigger than that, up to the theoretical maximum of 128 gigs, use like a 16K or heaven forbid even a 32K block if you absolutely have to. It relates to how it builds it. It relates to the RAM usage of it. It relates to the speed of it. Just follow that advice and you'll be much happier. We're going to delete this partition. We're going to create a new partition. And we're going to create a second one that's about 12 gigs. And we're going to click change and we're going to make that 4096 K blocks. Brings me to buffers. Take a look at your buffers here. Each buffer on this partition will take up 4 kilobytes of memory. So if you make it 200, 300, 400 buffer size, you're going to be using a lot of your RAM. Keep it to like 64. Buffer size is 64 is probably pretty comfortable. Doesn't use that much memory, like 256K of RAM. On your other drive here, your boot drive, because it's smaller, it's going to use 1024K per buffer. So you could go a little higher. You could do 60 or 80 buffers for that if you wanted to. I'm going to click OK, save changes on drive. Now these drives, when I reboot, are going to be partitioned and ready for me to install Amiga OS 3.1.4 on. I've got a video all about doing that, so I won't rehash that now. But you could just go ahead and use your install disks to install your operating system, and you're off and running. Now for these next things I want to do and show you, I've switched over to my already installed CF card. I've got 3.1.4 and all the patches installed on it. If you want to learn how to do that and how to install the great things like Best Workbench 1.0 and 1.1, I've got some previous videos that cover all of that. I'd encourage you to watch. Next, we want to get our SD card working on here. Now, I'm using a 256 meg SD card in mine. It'll handle up to 4 gigs. Don't waste time trying to get an 8 or a 16 or a 32 gig to work. Because of the limitations of the FAT95 file system on here, it's not going to work right. Stay under 4 gigs and you're going to be happy. What you want to do is this program that I've downloaded from IRIX Labs. Let's show all files. SD drive Z2-1.1. That's right on the IRIX Labs website. Just copy it over to your floppy, decompress it. What this is going to do is allow you to view anything on your SD card. These 3 folders here, devs, C, and L, those just need to be copied over to your Workbench partition. So there's our Workbench. We could highlight all these. We could drag and drop them here. Now in this case, it's going to say it's already found the files because I've already got them here. Replace all. It's putting over the SD card device driver. It's creating a mount list. It's creating a file for it to mount called SD0. Once that's done, normally you'd reboot, but like I said, I've already got it set up. You can take your SD card and hot swap it and put it right in there. So we'll just pop her right in. And that little guy is recognized faster than it would be recognized putting it in my i7 Windows 10 machine. Now I can see everything on my SD card and easily copy things back and forth between my PC and my Amiga just by copying them over right onto the SD card and then hot swapping it, plugging it right in here. There they are. Keep in mind, when you create a file or move or copy a file in Windows, it does not create the .info file in order to make icons, which is why you go into your menu, you click Show All Files, and it's going to show everything. If you want to learn how to create icons for these, I go over that in my Amiga CLI tutorial, my shell tutorial from a few months back. Now let's take a look at what this little guy can do. Now, time immemorial, somebody mentions sysinfo, and it's like they have to by default say, oh, it's not accurate, we know it's horrible, it's terrible, we can't stand it, but it's all we have. You know what? It's not that bad. I find it pretty darn reliable. I find it pretty darn accurate. And I think it's just like muscle memory. Like when somebody says, oh, I've got an Amiga 1200, the first response is, recap, recap, recap. You know, it's just like muscle memory that we have to say these things. Sysinfo's great. Prove me wrong. We'll launch our sysinfo here. Just tell me about the 68040 library. Now, we can see it detects standard Denis, standard Agnes. It detects the 68020 EC. Let's do a speed test on here. See what kind of results we get. And when we expand this, take a look. she's showing up as being over 4 times as fast as a stock Amiga 1200. And I believe it. Number one, you've got a processor that's running more than twice the speed. This is saying it's 31 megahertz. It's rated at 28. Then you've got fast RAM that is vastly superior to the access speed of the chip memory of a standard Amiga 1200. If you do this on an Amiga 1200 with RAM expansion, you're going to get this number a little higher because it's using some of the fast RAM. So more than 4 times faster than Amiga 1200. This thing's coming in as faster than an Amiga 3000, running at 25 megahertz, an 030 at 25 megahertz. I believe that too. Even though the 68030 is a superior chip and will do some things faster, raw speed, this one's got more power, it's got faster memory. I can believe that it's just a little faster, and it feels faster than my Amiga 3000. Now let's look at the drives. There's my GDH0. We're going to do a speed test. Pretty reliably comes in about 3.2 to 3.3 megabytes per second. Your traditional Amiga 1200 is going to come in at about 1.6 to 1.8 megabytes per second. Amiga 600 might be 1.1 or 1.2. So it's fast. Let's look at a couple other real-time tests. This is an Amiga 1000 from 1985. This came out a decade or so before MP3 files even really existed. Okay, we're going to launch Song Player. We're going to bring up a nice song here. And episode 46, Douglas. Now, if I get a copyright hit on this, I'm going to freak out. This is written by my very best friend, Joe Jenks, who's a popular folk artist, one of the most popular in the United States. This is a song that he wrote about me, 20 years ago or so. And so I really hope I don't get a copyright hit on this. But it's playing an MP3 file, okay. Full disclosure, I did downsample this from 256K MP3 file that it was originally down to 128K, but it's playing it back just fine. Now let's load up an animation. We'll get Deluxe Paint open, Deluxe Paint 5. Now I know this animation's in PAL mode, so let's go low res and let's do a little overscan here. This animation is done by Kevin Saunders, also known as Invent71, and you'll recognize him from mine and Pixel Vixen's Amiga Art Contest from a few months ago. This is his animation. I just want to show you it running on a machine like this. And now we hit 4 to start it and Tab to initiate the color cycling. Amiga 1000 with the 520 Classic runs the animation absolutely beautifully. And I love this one too. We've got Art Department Professional loaded here. Let's load up an image. We'll go to my Pictures folder and we'll load a nice ham image in here. Brings her right up and renders it. No problems at all. Nice and fast with its 8 megabytes of RAM and its 020 processor. Brings up the image for image processing pretty quickly. Lovely. Now let's try a really difficult and hard to view image next. I hope the machine can handle this one. Okay, here it comes. Yeah, bringing it in so far. Oh my goodness. Look at that distortion. Look at that data corruption. What is this? Oh, it's Boat and Aaron from Amigos. Hey guys. Not bad for Ham 6, huh? Now this device is perfect if you use WHD load. That needs RAM, serious RAM. You really need 1 meg of chip RAM minimum, 2 meg is better. WHD load doesn't work well on this at all. You want 2, 4, or 8 megabytes of fast RAM just to make it perform better. You want a decent processor, and you want a fast hard drive. And this takes the cake. If you're looking to use your A500 for WHD load, this is perfect, and it's literally all that you need. You're done. It's perfect. Now, how about negatives on this board? To be honest, I've not really found anything bad about the board. It seems to be well built. It seems to be well featured. It's got some nice features to it. It's fast as all get out, faster than I thought it would be. You know, when I can get my Amiga 1000 running faster than my Amiga 3000 with a $170 card, I'm a happy boy. I would rate this, without an hesitation, 4.75 Amiga check marks out of 5. Only reason it loses a little bit is because it doesn't have the documentation that it really should. And it'd be great if it shipped with a floppy that had the flash utility and the drivers for the SD card, and just shipped with one little floppy, since some of us don't have access to machines that can transfer that over. This thing is a must buy. If you've got an Amiga 500 or Amiga 1000 and you want to speed that little guy up, put this on your short list of cards to buy. And it's a pretty short list. I'd say ACA 500 Plus. I would say this card for sure. And then, you know, think about the internal expandability internal expansions like the Witcher as a third option. Eric's Labs has been responsive to me as I've been getting this put together. I've emailed him a few questions. He's gotten back to me within hours usually, and the support has been fantastic so far. So, thumbs up. But until next time, this is Doug from 10 Minute Amiga Retrocast, signing out.